Who was the greatest slave in the world? How can we learn to be free? This is something that's been pondered by philosophers throughout history. And in this video, I want to share with you some wisdom that I came across recently that I think can really help us become freer, happier people, in the teachings of Epictetus, who was a former slave himself. Epicurus was born a slave, and yet he taught some of the most powerful lessons about freedom and happiness that have stood the test of time. So today, we're going to be exploring the life of Epictetus, and how his story can teach us all about what it truly means to be free. Epictetus was born into slavery around 55 AD and spent the first 30 years of his life in chains. But despite his circumstances, he became one of the most influential philosophers of ancient Greece. He taught some of the most powerful lessons about freedom and happiness that have stood the test of time. And he said that true freedom is not the absence of external constraints, but the presence of internal resolve. It is not the ability to do anything we want, but the ability to refrain from wanting what we don't need. In today's society, we often equate freedom with the absence of external constraints. We think of ourselves as being free if we are not physically restrained or legally bound. However, Epictetus teaches us that this is only a limited view of what it means to be free. True freedom, he says, is the freedom of the mind, the ability to control our thoughts and our judgments regardless of our external circumstances. In other words, we are only truly free when we are free from the chains of our own making, our own beliefs, opinions, and judgments. There's a famous quote that goes, "The mind is everything. What you think you become." This is a profound statement because it highlights the importance of our thoughts and beliefs in shaping our reality. Our thoughts and beliefs shape our actions, which in turn create our circumstances. So if we want to change our circumstances, we must first change our thoughts and beliefs. And this is exactly what Epictetus taught his students. He taught them that they were not slaves to their external circumstances, but rather slaves to their own judgments. And he showed them how to break free from these mental chains. Imagine, for example, that you're sitting on a beach and you see a bird flying overhead. You might think to yourself, how I wish I could fly like that bird. And in that moment, you feel a sense of limitation and frustration. You feel like you re-stuck on the ground, while the bird is free to soar through the sky. However, Epictetus would say that it is not the bird that is free, and it is not you that is constrained. Rather, it's your judgment about the situation that creates the sense of limitation. You would say that it's not the bird that's free, but you're thinking about the bird that makes you feel constrained. You are free to choose how you respond to the situation. You can choose to focus on the beauty of the bird and the freedom of its flight, without feeling the need to be like it. Or you can choose to ignore the bird altogether and focus on something else. The point is that you have a choice in how you respond to the situation. And it's your response, not the situation itself, that determines whether you feel free or constrained. Epicurus also taught that we often suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of our opinion about what happens. He famously said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about those things." For example, imagine that you're waiting for an important phone call, and you start to feel anxious and uneasy. Keep checking the clock, wondering where the person is, and you start to get angry and frustrated. Then the phone rings, and you pick up to hear a recording saying that the person who called didn't reach you. You feel even worse. But then you realize that you haven't actually lost anything. The phone call didn't go straight to voicemail. It simply went to an automated system that plays a message. You weren't actually rejected, you just think you were. In this situation, you can see that it wasn't the phone call itself that caused you to suffer, but rather your interpretation of the phone call. You suffered because you believed that the person had called to reject you, even though that wasn't actually the case. So how can we apply this wisdom to our lives today? Well, the first step is to become aware of our judgments and the stories we tell ourselves about the world. We often make assumptions and judgments without even realizing it, and these judgments can lead to unnecessary suffering. For example, you might see a long line at the grocery store and think to yourself, "How frustrating. I hate waiting in line." Or you might see a crowded room and think, "How uncomfortable. I hate being around so many people." These are judgments and stories that we tell ourselves that can cause us to suffer. The next step is to question these judgments and the stories we tell ourselves. When we're faced with a challenging situation, ask yourself, is this actually true, or is it just my opinion? For example, When you see a long line at the grocery store, ask yourself, is it actually so bad to wait in line? Maybe it is an opportunity to practice patience, or to observe the other customers and appreciate the diversity of human beings around me. By questioning our judgments, we can free ourselves from the unnecessary suffering that they cause. Finally, we must choose to focus on what we can control and let go of what we can't. As Epictetus famously said, there is no slavery where there is no fear of losing. We often worry about things that are beyond our control, like the actions of other people or the outcome of a situation. But when we focus on these things, we give them power over us. Instead, we should focus on what we can control, like our own thoughts and actions. When we do this, we become freer and more resilient in the face of adversity. But why is it that we cling to these beliefs and judgments so tightly? Why is it so difficult to let go of our attachment to outcomes and to surrender to what is? Well, according to Epictetus, it's because we fear losing something that we value. We fear losing our sense of control, our ego, or even our very survival. But Epictetus teaches us that this fear is unfounded. He says that when we understand the nature of reality and our place in it, we realize that we have nothing to fear. We realize that everything changes and that nothing is permanent. We learn to accept what is and to let go of our attachment to specific outcomes. When we do this, we become freer and more resilient in the face of adversity. So how can we cultivate this understanding and overcome our fear of losing? Well, according to Epictetus, it starts with a willingness to examine our own beliefs and judgments. He encourages us to question our assumptions about the world and to challenge our ego-based beliefs. He also teaches us to focus on what we can control and to let go of what we cut in. When we practice these things, we begin to see that we are not as fragile as we think we are. We begin to see that we can handle whatever life throws at us, and that we can still find joy and meaning even in difficult situations. We have the power to choose our response to any situation, even if we are physically restrained or facing external constraints. This is the lesson that Epictetus taught his students over 2,000 years ago. And it's a lesson that is just as relevant today as it was then. We are all capable of living a life of freedom and happiness, even in the midst of adversity. It all starts with a shift in our thinking. It starts with a willingness to question our beliefs and to let go of our attachment to specific outcomes. When we do this, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities, and we discover the freedom that has always been within our grasp. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to stay updated on my latest videos. Thank you, and until next time.